Hello everyone and welcome to a new Top Tips for Archaeology graduates. Today I'm joined by Victoria. Hi Victoria, how are you today?
Hi, very well, thank you. Sorry, I just muted myself slightly while you were talking there.
That's okay. And I'm really glad that Victoria has joined us today to talk about her career. She's worked in several different areas and is now working in publishing. So maybe Victoria, you could tell us about your current role and what it entails.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I'm an assistant editor for BMJ Open. That's an open access journal that's part of the BMJ publishing group. So the acronym stands for the British Medical Journal, but they have a whole bunch of other journals underneath that sort of umbrella term. So my job is to assess manuscripts when they come in. So people do research, write a paper to get peer reviewed and published. We all know this from reading endless papers through our undergrad. I assess the papers for scope, check that, that they make sense, that their ethics and consent are all in place, all of that sort of thing. And then they get sent off for peer review. Once they come back from peer review, I take a look at the reviewers' reports and make a decision. So accept or reject, but more often than not, they go back for revisions for a couple of rounds or so.
Yes. So what do you enjoy about your role working for the BMJ?
I think that you're like right at the forefront of research. So as research is coming in, as it's being done, you're right there when it's being reported and disseminated. So that's really interesting. You can get some really, really fascinating papers as well. So that's really quite cool. And of course, the people I work with, they're all just really, really lovely. Publishing can be a little bit of a small world, but it's a nice world. So it's good.
Can I ask, because I often see things that are reported in medical journals, they're reported on the radio, they go into newspapers. Do you also deal a little bit with the media then? Is it kind of, do you flag up papers? Do you see kind of the papers that you're working on then coming to press in that way?
Well, yes, sometimes. So we do have an option in our little system to sort of go, oh, this is an interesting paper, or we'll maybe mention it to the editor-in-chief and say, well, this one might get a little bit of attention. So then we'll have maybe an associate editor or an editorial board member just take an extra look at it, make sure it's really above board. And then, of course, you see these some of these papers in newspapers and worldwide as well, which is quite cool, especially if it's one that you've worked on personally.
Yeah. Can I ask then the other side of that? What do you find more challenging about your role or working in the publishing world?
Yeah, so I think that's sort of a two-pronged answer for me. It can be quite samey, my particular job. So there's a lot of stuff that you do that you're just doing the same thing day in, day out. But then the variety there comes from the papers, the content that you're looking at itself. So you will be doing the same things, but you are looking at different papers every day and different research. So that's quite cool. But then obviously as well, it's the volume of things, especially with COVID. Just loads and loads and loads and loads of papers coming in. And so you end in a lot of publishing, you end up with little backlogs of manuscripts. And of course, we want to do our best by researchers and get their papers through the peer review process and published just as soon as we can. So you do feel like a little bit of that pressure just to keep things going. But again, as I said, I've got a really excellent team that I work with and, very dedicated to making that happen. So,
yeah. That sounds great. And yeah, the deadline pressure and that sense of time, I guess, is what you're saying. I think a lot of people will kind of appreciate that there can be a sense of kind of like, oh, I want to do the best, and that can make time pressures perhaps seem a little bit up to the forefront of your mind. Can I ask then, how did you get into publishing? Kind of what's your journey from your degree at York through to getting into being an assistant editor?
My journey is a bit of an odd one, a bit of a convoluted one. I started at York doing an archaeology degree. I did the BSc in archaeology. And I found I was really, really interested in the genetics and ancient DNA side of things. I have a little bit of a background in healthcare professionally as well. And so I had that interest in human disease and in genetics. And so naturally I went off to do the Masters in Genetics of Human Disease at UCL. And so from there, I went into a research assistant position at the Sanger Institute in a lab. But, it was quite a commute. I was living in London and commuting to the Sanger, and it was about 5 hours return trip. It was not fun.
That's a long commute.
It was because of trains and things. It was such a pain. And, not such a positive experience with the boss, and the realization that I'm really not cut out for animal studies. I have respect for people who have to do animal studies, but it just kind of ached me out a little bit. So working with zebrafish, no, not for me. I saw an ad for an assistant editor at the BMC series, which is another open access online journal series run by Springer Nature. And it was entry level, no experience required. And I'd always had good feedback that I was great at writing and editing and all that sort of thing. So I thought, okay, why not give it a go? And of course it was in London, so that was helpful commute wise. I got that job, worked there for about a year before I started at BMJ, where I was working initially as a content editor for the evidence-based journals, a lot of commissioning, and I was kind of working by myself, I guess siloed on my own in a little island, just working on 3 or 4 different journals, doing bits and pieces here and there. So I did that for a couple of years before I went on maternity leave to have my daughter. While I was off, I thought, well, it would be nice to just be able to concentrate on one journal. So the job for assistant editor came up and I went for it and applied. And now that's where I am. And actually, I work with a few people from BMC who also migrated over to the BMJ. So it's a bit like a little reunion as well, which is nice.
Oh, so that's some different steps then. So you first went into research a little bit more intensely, working in a lab, and then over into editing. I thank you very much for sharing that journey. I think a lot of people will kind of recognize that sense of having a first step into something and then saying, actually, you know what, this isn't right for me. And I think it actually takes a lot of bravery to say, you know what, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to find something else and explore that. Do you think you'll stay in editing, or do you think you'll go on to do something else in the future?
No, I mean, I don't think I will stay in editing, actually. It has been really interesting and has been really, really helpful to sort of see the publishing side of things, definitely. But I actually want to get back into academia. So later today, actually, I have an admissions interview for a PhD position. So I'm hoping that will go well. But that's the thing, really, you do have to follow your interests and follow what works for you and what is good for you at the time. And publishing has been a great sort of experience for a few years, but going forward, I think academia is the place for me, with all of its pitfalls and challenges as well, I'm sure. Yeah, congratulations and very best of luck for your interview later on today. I'm sure that everybody watching will be rooting for you as well. And I think it's really important to hear these stories, that the decision you make the day after you graduate, or those first few years after you graduate, is not the end of the road by any stretch of the imagination. And to be honest, when I was at the Sanger Institute and I was flailing because I was thinking, this commute is killing me, and I'm not getting along with my employer, and I'm not sure about fish and working with animals, and I was thinking, I failed, how can I fail at this, And then I just sort of took a step back and thought, well, it's not a failure as such. Okay, maybe it hasn't been the right step for me, but that's okay. That's what it's all about when you're in your 20s and 30s after your degree. Try a few things, see what works. I think that's wonderful to hear. So can I ask you how you've drawn on your degree since you've finished? What do you think the kind of skills studying archaeology gave you as you've moved into first sort of genetics and then on into publishing? I like to sort of say, in the most positive way possible, it makes you great at rationale and at sort of justifying things. So I know in archaeology, you have to really give the point of why you want to do this thing, because if you've got some precious materials in a lab and then people are going, well, why do you want to take apart this bit of skeleton, and you have to give a really good reasoning for it. So your reasoning skills are just top notch at the end of it, I think. But also I remember there being this push for using your transferable skills, and I remember just that phrase always, transferable skills, but that has really been the thing that I've taken away the most, really, is looking at what I've done and sort of boiling things down to what are the skills we're looking at here, what are the key attributes or the things that I've learned, and then applying them, say for a job, looking at the job spec and going, okay, so editing, right, well, I don't have any direct experience in editing, but obviously I've edited my own work, I've edited for other people, maybe you've done an internship or a bit of volunteering and you've done something there. So yeah, I'd say that's been the main skill that has been, you know, from the undergrad project. And then just having that confidence to go for things. The archaeology department is just, it's really a lovely, very nurturing place, and you really do grow academically, but also as a person there. I know it sounds really corny, but yeah, I have nothing but good things to say about the archaeology degrees at York.
Well, that's nice to hear, thank you. And I certainly, from my perspective as someone who teaches, it's such a pleasure to guide people through that period from 18 to 21, 22, or even if you're a mature student coming back through that process of becoming an independent learner, which is what you're doing at university. The changes over that time, they're thrilling to be a bystander to as well.
Yeah.
So can I ask you, what are your top tips for graduates who either want to follow in your footsteps into publishing, or perhaps just in general?
Okay, so if you are not sort of wanting to go down the sciencey route like I did, so you don't want to do a master's in genetics or human evolution or anything like that, you could look into doing a kind of master's or a PG certificate, that's it, isn't it? In publishing or something like that, and that's always quite valuable. Otherwise, take a look at entry-level roles. You'd be looking for things like editorial assistant, production assistant, not so much assistant editor, but that could happen. That could be useful. The BMC series is definitely one of the training grounds for publishers. So if anything comes up with them, I'd say go for that as well. Take a look at the alumni network. So people like me, there's another alumna from my cohort, actually, Esther Fagelson, who works in publishing as well. So yeah, reach out to your networks as much as you can, ask some questions. And then finally, at BMJ, we actually have an internship program, and there's a sort of a work experience program that people can apply for as well. There's one, I think, for high school students, but as far as I remember, although don't quote me directly, there is one for university students as well. And that's a really excellent way to get into the publishing side of things and just have a look and see if it's even for you in the first place.
I think that's really fantastic advice, and we'll link to some of those things that you've mentioned below this video. Thank you so much, Victoria, for making the time today to speak to us about your journey. Thank you to everyone for watching. Join us again next time for more top tips for archaeology graduates.